Hi Jazz.
Hi there, Chris.
Hiya. Can you tell us a little bit about your presentation talk that you held at the Astrology Club about ancestral healing?
Yeah, sure. It's a while back now, so I kind of had to dig my notes out to go through. But yeah, ancestral healing. There is a lot of connection in our birth chart that obviously gives us lots of clues, gives us lots of information about our ancestral story and our ancestral links. So I'm going to go through the houses and talk about some of the connections. Okay, so like for example, first of all, I'd like to just mention we have a birth chart. Okay, so it's a circular diagram, and in there we have houses. And sometimes, people have their birth charts done to find out more information about obviously how the planets and houses, etc., the whole sort of thing about astrology is having an influence on them. So in terms of ancestral healing, let's have a look. So first house, it's our overall personality, so it's kind of like who we are, the whole sum of our ancestors, and we're kind of like in a nutshell that whole influence of our ancestors. So the first house, we display lots of traits of our ancestors, physically. So for example, the way somebody might sit, the way somebody might talk. It could be like, sometimes we see these in families, don't we? Like, he or she has the exact mannerism of her grandfather or his grandfather. Or, for example, you're just sort of like, the way you organise the table, it's just the way your mother used to do. So these sort of things, like how we physically do things, a lot of it is obviously carried on from previous generations. Not necessarily always learnt behaviour. Some of it may be learnt behaviour obviously from our parents and ancestors, but some of it is like how we carry on genetically as well. So that is our physical reality. Then the second house is very much about our possessions, how we kind of like are influenced by our parents in terms of our possessions. And this is like if we don't break the cycles of our ancestors, a lot of all this, what I'm talking about, because we can break the cycles. So for example, if your mother hoards things, then one of the children have taken on that trait and they hoard things. So that's significant to them. And that's kind of like their possessions. This is my possessions. They could have things like people as well as possessions, certain objects and thoughts and beliefs, they can be possessions. Like this is how sometimes what's followed on ancestrally, sometimes people, the descendants, will carry on in terms of things like faith, religion, culture, like certain beliefs and things, they can become possessions as well. So following on from that actually is the third house, because that is our thought process and how we think. So sometimes we think just like one of our ancestors. The thought process may be very similar, and what may have been, kind of their thoughts and ideas, sometimes we follow that on. It's like we take on that next piece of the jigsaw puzzle in terms of the thought process for our ancestors. And then following on from that, we've got the fourth house, which is the home, the family, the roots. Now this is actually a very powerful house because the fourth house actually does rule family, and the IC, which is the point that cuts through the chart and goes into the depth of the lineage, tells a very significant story, especially if the IC has planets attached to it, or it makes certain aspects to other planets in other houses. And so then there are, stories within that which are very significant. But the fourth house is also a place of powerful healing. So that is like the area that you can find out and get a clue of how you can perhaps heal a lot of the things that you need to or want to, that may be concerning you regarding your followed on story from your ancestors, because there are lots of different stories, and I'll come onto some of those other areas as we're going round the houses. So, fourth house, obviously your roots, family, ancestral lineage. It's the home, it's the mother, it's the womb experience, however your birth experience was, the womb experiences. It is inherited undercurrents and beyond, okay? So that's why I was saying the line that connects you beyond just the line of your birth chart, it goes really, really deep. And when I say undercurrents and beyond, sometimes there are like this is the fourth house is also very connected actually to the mother's story, because when we go to the 10th house later on, it's the father's story, but the fourth house is very much the clue about the mother's story. So the mother, is there a planet or planets in the fourth house? Because that will give you clues about the mother and the mother's story, and what's going on. For example, is your mother famous? Was your mother ill or quite a lot? Was your mother very poor? Was she very oppressed? These are very significant clues that can be very, very significant for you to understand in terms of your story. And then we've got the fifth house. Now the fifth house is very much about sort of the child and the child within. So it kind of tells a story of our childhood, because here you can find out the clues obviously to your childhood that you kind of feel that you want to now revisit and sort out. It is also the area actually that can give you the clues about ways of having fun and connecting more to your humorous side. It is very much also the house that would connect you to sort of things like romance as well. And so sometimes when people are having difficulty finding romance, it could be that there is a clue in the fifth house that they could look at, and there could be issues to do with the inner child that you could go into. The sixth house is very much sort of like your work, your service, your health. And so if we're looking at work, family traditions, so they're carrying on the family story in terms of their ancestors. And also the health. So if there are health issues going on in the family, this is the area that needs to be looked at to find out what clues you can find to help towards the healing. So for example, if there is diabetes in the family, in the lineage, there is a history of heart attacks, or even, you know, things like depression. Here you've got clues and ways of healing and dealing with things, to sort of like try and break some of those patterns that have come from your ancestral lineage. Okay, so then we move on to the 7th house, and the 7th house is usually about partnership and other people. So sometimes we can come into contact with other people that can help us, that also may act as our ancestors. They also may have been an ancestor in a previous life, for example, and that's why they have come into your life at a significant time to be part of your healing, or to be part of that next piece of the jigsaw puzzle again. So, a very important house, the 7th house. 8th house is, well, 8th house is like very kind of deep. It's the house where we find a significant amount of inheritance from the ancestors, but depending on what's going on in that house in terms of your planets, we'll give you the clues as into what kind of inheritance we're talking about. Because with this house, because it also rules sex, it also rules abuse, because anything psychological is ruled by this house. Money, you know, where sometimes other people take your money away from you, you know, so when sometimes there's incestual behavior going on within families, there's abuse going on. Some of these are the negative traits, and the way forward here in the 8th house is about a complete transformation, because with the 8th house you're talking about death, birth, regeneration, rebirth. Those things have to die away. It's kind of like the phoenix rising from the ashes. You know, it's that kind of story with the 8th house, because it's where you let go. It's where you you know, really kind of go into the depths of the underworld and deal with your dark stories, the dark side of, you know, your whole ancestral lineage that you are carrying on. Once you have done that and you create a rebirth, new beginnings, then you go on to the 9th house, because you have a more kind of higher way of thinking, because the 9th house is the higher mind, it's the higher self, it's the self that is very spiritual actually, because, you know, after all the stuff from the 8th house here, you have the opportunity to, you know, maybe embark on a lot of spiritual sort of quests, whether they are reading philosophy, whether they are traveling, you know, going to different countries. This house is kind of like the place of expanding the mind in a much higher, into a much higher vibration, because that way you're kind of like now thinking on a much higher level than you used to before. You know, it's the way you're vibrating. Your energy is like moving much further and beyond. It's kind of like transcending everything else that's been there before. So, you know, the 9th house is very much about transcending. Then we move on to the 10th house. Now, you know, when we were in the 4th house, I said that it was very much about the mother and the mother stories. here in the 10th house, it's very much about the father and the father's story. And so it is kind of like giving, all the planets here are giving you the clues again and the jigsaw puzzles, you know, how they're going to fit in terms of what's happening in the 10th house. The 10th house is also very important in terms of identifying your whole family kind of culture, you know, because all families have a culture. And so how your family fits into overall communities and tradition and society, you know, that will all be significant in the planets and the placing of your 10th house. So it's kind of like also the house where, you know, you kind of know and gain respect within society. So what you're doing, how you're sort of putting yourself out there in society is very much, you know, 10th house. So then we're moving on to the 11th house, which is about goals and aspirations, friends, and groups, and societies. So this is about groups, you know. So did your family belong to certain groups? Are you following the same, you know? Were there unfulfilled wishes and goals of your ancestors because maybe they passed away, they couldn't follow that next step on, and now perhaps you're doing it for them, you're carrying that on, or perhaps you want to break away, because it's also the house of independence where you break away from family ideas and, you know, and you want to do something completely different. So this is kind of like the house that you look to see, you know, what planets are there, what's going on, what sign is there, to give you the clues to how maybe you can gain that independence and break away. But obviously, if you're quite happy to follow the goals and aspirations and desires for the next stages of your ancestors, then that's fine too, but this will give you the clues on how to do that. And then after that, we move into the 12th house. 12th house is very much about karma, that big word karma. And I will do a video later on karma itself, so you can look to that video to understand, you know, the workings of karma. But talking about it in terms of ancestral influences, sometimes we take on karma for our family, for our ancestors. And, you know, sometimes it's done without us even knowing we did it. So here is your opportunity now, if you look to the 12th house, on how you can break yourself free. Because the 12th house is about bondage, so you have tied yourself into that bondage of that karma of your ancestors. And if you don't want it, you can break it, you know, break free from it. You don't have to carry it on. It's a choice, you know. It is also the house of spirituality. And it's also the house where we can find a oneness and merge with the divine and finding our true sort of like experiences of, you know, how we're going to merge with that oneness, whatever that means for you, you know, because like for me, oneness is about being at one with divine and being at one with yourself, being at peace with yourself. So here in the 12th house, you can find the answers, you know, in how you're going to do that, how you can achieve that. Yeah, so the other thing, you know, like I'm just going to go do a very quick run through some of the planets that are connected. So for example, the sun is very much about our confidence, you know, like when the sun comes out, I mean, I really wanted to do this video outside today because the sun's been out. When the sun comes out, we feel good, don't we? It's a feel-good thing. It's about confidence. And so look to the sun for issues about confidence, low spirits, depression, conscious ego, all that is related to the sun. And so look to what planets or transits are happening to the sun. Moon, themes of patterns of nurturing issues, emotional connections, attachments. Mercury, themes and patterns of ancestral voices. On the flip side of that, it could be schizophrenia, but in terms of listening to the ancestors and hearing their voices, look to Mercury. Fantastic planet. How spirit give us the information through our thought forms. If you seem to have patterns of things like accidents, cuts, if there's violence going on, anger, and if there has been themes of that within your family, then look for Mars placing. Venus, themes and patterns of love, self-worth, money issues. So if you've had problems in love, you have low self-worth, and there are issues about money, look to where Venus is. Jupiter, themes and patterns of weight issues, gambling, overspending and philosophy. So look for where Jupiter is in your chart to try and resolve those issues. Saturn, themes and patterns of tradition with the ancestral lineage. This is Saturn, actually somebody who is given a good status within the community, because Saturn is like, it's the goat and that climbs the mountain, but the mountain, when you do climb it, you get to that peak and you're sort of like high up, and so it's a slow progress. But with Saturn placement, if you've got good links to your ancestral lineage, then that's really, really good. Uranus, themes and patterns of sudden disappearances and spiritual lineage. Sometimes you may have had ancestors in your family that suddenly disappeared, for example. You do hear these stories, and that's to do with Uranus. Neptune, themes and patterns of addictions in substances and alcohol, mental health problems, and sometimes you could also have ancestral dreams and messages, amnesia, sleep disturbances, disconnections also of the ancestors. Neptune can also be a very, very good planet for turning all of that around to actually do dream work and meditation and connect with your ancestors. Pluto, themes and patterns of victim abuse, being the victim, being abused and the abuser, genetic memory and trauma. It is also about sort of like, sometimes when you have an afflicted Pluto in your chart, the affliction of the links to the ancestors, sometimes I have actually seen where there might have been an ancestor that has actually killed, raped, abused, other people within the family. So it's a very deep planet. It's very much linked to the 8th house when I talked about the 8th house earlier. We have to kind of heal our wounds. We can't just fall into that victim role and say, well, it wasn't my fault, it's my ancestors, they did this, they did that, why should I be responsible? But for us to take responsibility even for our ancestors is such an honourable task, and somebody has to start somewhere. So let that start with you, me, whoever else feels that they want to really seriously do their healing journey. It's very important, and it's a very honourable task that we do this for our ancestors. Yeah. So, okay, I'll take you through a very basic visualization. You want to close your eyes. relax and visualize like a golden light around you, a beautiful golden light. You're held in this kind of beautiful golden light, so you just close your eyes and you visualize that, and then behind you are your parents. So we can say the father on the right side, because the right side of the body is masculine, and the mother on the left side, because the left side of the body is the feminine. So we can have the mother and the father standing behind you, and you can start to feel this golden light emanating from you towards your parents, so that they are completely engulfed in this golden light that's coming out from you. And your angels and your guardians, they're all helping you, and maybe they are sending this golden light through your crown chakra. Then you can start to imagine all the way back the lineages from your mother's side and your father's side. So then your grandparents start arriving, working back 7 generations, and you can continue to use the golden light to heal 7 generations backwards, all the way back. And you can do this as many times as you want to, because the more and more your ancestral lineages are healed, the better it is for you, because we are connected, you know. There is a Chinese proverb that says that there is an invisible thread that connects us all. So just because, you know, sometimes people say, oh well, my parents have passed away. Well, they may have passed away physically, but they're still there spiritually, you know, and spiritually they will always be there, and so will all your other ancestors. And we can call in our ancestors at any time, you know, they're always there. At another time I'm going to do another meditation for you on calling in your ancestors, and that's quite a powerful one as well, where you call in the ancestors. But for this one, continue feeding the golden light, both sides, your mother, your father, going back maybe even further than 7 generations. If you can get it to 25, that is fantastic, because that is very, very deep work. And then you can ask your angels and their angels to just come down, you know, with pillars of light, and they are just waving their wands and this beautiful white light that is just for peace and healing as well, all throughout the lineages, you know. And then you can thank all the ancestors for coming forward, for being there. Just thank them. Gratitude is so important, always being thankful for everything. And then you can sort of visualize them sort of going back into their abodes, wherever they came from, and just leaving you, and then, you know, you're left on your own again. And then you can ask your angels to come and just give you a hug and just give you some love and nourishment, and you know, and just thank the angels as well for coming forward and being there. I hope you enjoyed this video. I enjoyed talking about it very much, and if you have any questions, please feel free to contact me, and the links will be below. If you want to know more about ancestral healing as well, contact me. And if you think that then, you know, how it might be able to help you, I do one-to-one therapy where I do ancestral healing within the one-to-one therapy. You can inquire about that as well. And you know, so yeah, thank you for listening, and hopefully speak to you soon. Thank you.